I'm Joe Fernandez, and welcome to Android Developer Office Hours. Joining me is Trevor Johns.
Howdy.
And in a little while, we'll have our special guest, James Dong from the Media Framework team. As a reminder, folks who've got questions, please join us in the Hangout, and we can take your questions live. We do like to talk to real heads every once in a while. To get started, though, we'll look at the questions in the moderator queue. If you've got questions, please post them there. And if you like the questions in there, plug them up for the ones that you want to hear the answer to. So first one we've got is from Wideout in Oklahoma. And he asks, as a follow-on to the question asked today on the EMEA show about the issue tracker, focusing on the most starred issues may make sense for enhancements, but for defects, doesn't seem effective. How about setting up a triage team from the community?
All right. So for those of you who were not watching the EMEA office hours, the question was basically how are bugs in the Android issue tracker, which by the way is located at b.android.com. So it's like bugs, b.android.com. And the answer was that we look at them. There are a lot of issues there, and we look at them primarily by number of stars, which is what we use as our voting mechanism. So if issues get a lot of stars, they bubble up to the top, and then they get the most attention. Of course, we do try and take a look at all bugs, but some get, of course, some more attention than others. So so as far as does that make sense for defects? I think sometimes it does. There certainly are some really annoying defects that impact a lot of people. And it's good to go and make sure there's a way to go and get, you have a way to voice that you need those fixed. And so I think stars work really well for that. That being said, sometimes there are some bugs that don't impact a lot of people, but the few people it impacts, there is, it's still worth fixing because it's an annoyance to that small number of people, right? If it's a blocking bug, that if it prevents you from building something, right? If you can't, stream media, if you can't, just for an example, that should be fixed probably, a little bit quicker than something that's more of a cosmetic change. So in those cases, we still do take a look at pretty much every bug when it comes in. We need to go, we assign them. We do initial triage. So yes, even though we do look at the start issues first, we do look at all the bugs. So I'm not sure that we really need to add another level of triage on there since we're already doing another level internally. But that being said, I'll certainly go ahead and pass this along to the rest of the team and see if management likes that idea. And it's possible it could go somewhere. We'll see.
Cool.
So feature request noted.
Great. All right. Thanks for that question. And next up, we've got Bro Software Design in Lucca, Italy. Who asks, audio record and audio track are critical CPU demanding classes. I experienced distorted and choppy audio in my VoIP app, voice over IP. Are there best practices or patterns of use to help avoid these problems? Deep specs on the internal behavior would help.
Okay.
That's a good question. A little bit out of my league. How about you?
I can speak a little bit on that one. So we added low latency audio paths in Jelly Bean, but this is primarily for playback. Mm-hmm. For recording, there's not really a really good low latency path yet. Audio record is the best one available, and it does work, but you just have to be sort of careful when you use it. The most important thing is to make sure that you pick your buffer sizes carefully. And keep in mind that those buffer sizes will change on a device-by-device basis. So there are some methods in there you can go and use to try and figure out what size buffer is appropriate for the device you're on. And that will help go and avoid some of those stuttering issues that you're running into. And hopefully at some point in the future we'll go and add some more APIs or improve the existing APIs. That'll help improve latency there as well. But latency shouldn't cause distortion, right? Latency is more of a, you'll have a little bit of lag. Yeah, choppy audio almost exclusively is a buffer problem, so check your buffer sizes. Now, that said, since you are doing a voice over IP app, I will also point out that Android has a built-in SIP stack already, and you might want to consider reusing that, especially if you are talking to a SIP server, which a lot of voice over IP apps are. And you can just go ahead and tie into that and then have the OS handle all of your audio decoding and encoding and send it to the server for you, and then all you have to do is write a UI on top of that. So if that makes sense, definitely something to look into as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Do we have anybody in the Hangout for questions?
Not yet.
Okay. All right. So next up, we've got Marcus in Europe. Asks how to determine if a specific audio recording, say AMR-WB, is supported for encoding. Audio codec get codec has no constant for AMR-WB and others. Background, at least Xperia X10 has no AMR, doesn't have this format. And need to detect this or else the app just crashes in native C. All right, so detecting audio formats supported on a specific device, which is, I guess it is device specific.
Yeah, well, I seem to recall there is a get codecs method that'll go and tell you what codecs are present. And I can't remember if there's a way to go and distinguish. I think there's even a way to distinguish AMR wideband and narrowband. So I'm pretty sure that would work there as well. So if you
constant for it though.
No, there's just a generic constant for AMR if I remember correctly.
Oh, that's AMR. Okay, the specific brand of AMR.
Yeah, well, the flavor of AMR. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you distinguish between the two different types of AMR. I'm sure there's a way to go and distinguish between them. If you post a Stack Overflow question, we can go ahead and look into that a little bit more. But in general, I mean, the correct approach is to go and call get codecs and check which codecs are present, and that'll at least get you as far as AMR. And we'll try and find some information about how to distinguish between the two different flavors of AMR for you.
Right. Thanks for that question. Let's see what else we've got here. Marcus also asks, will there be support for streaming capable container format in media recorder like MPEG TS? Let's see, in the future. So, capable container format. I'm not sure what he's asking there.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with MPEG TS myself. This is probably a good question for our guest when he finally arrives. So let's come back to this one in a bit.
Okay, let's move up here. All right, Alex asks, I would love to see more working code samples in the documentation. Yes, you and many other people actually. More specifically, if we take a good look at the code that was presented at Google 2012, we can see that it had a lot of mistakes, and all of them were copy-pasted to the developer's documentation. I'm not sure that that's actually true. It may seem like the stuff that you're working on was copy-pasted from the developer's documentation. We do use our documentation extensively to build our samples and code samples. And unfortunately, when we write them, sometimes we make mistakes. So definitely appreciate the feedback on that. But more helpful would be pointing out some of those issues. Certainly, you can go to beandroid.com and file some bugs on that one. We definitely look at that for documentation errors, coding errors, and all that stuff. So appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, and if you're feeling a bit more adventurous too, I'll point out you actually can go and modify all the docs yourself. We don't normally point it out too heavily because our documentation system could be a little nicer. But if you look in the source tree under frameworks, base, docs, HTML, everything in this is in there with the .jd extension, and you can make a change, or also Java docs as well for the API reference. And if you send us a patch in Gerrit, especially for anything that's an error, we definitely would love to have a patch to go and fix that. But that said, that shouldn't stop you from filing a bug, right? We'd much rather have a bug than nothing at all. So either way, let us know if you do discover an error, and whether or not it's by a patch or us fixing it for you, we want to go and get that documentation straightened out.
Yeah, so definitely do file a bug. If you're feeling more adventurous, like as Trevor said, you can go ahead and actually make a change and file a patch, and we'll take a look at that. But please do tell us about the stuff that is missing or incorrect. We're always working on improvements to the documentation, so we do appreciate that feedback, and we definitely take a look at that when folks file bugs. So please give us more feedback. We appreciate it. All right, let's move on to Marcus is very popular with the questions today. Again, from Europe, he's asking, can a new video recording start exactly where a previous one ends?
I want to say not likely, because you're going to have to stop the video recording, start the video recording, and in between that time, some number of milliseconds will pass while you're performing operations. I think the best option would be to go and have a single continuous recording and then trim it up afterwards. Or alternatively record into some in-memory store and then just go and splice it in memory. I think if you're just going and writing out to a file and you're trying to switch files, there's going to be overhead there and it's not going to start and stop exactly where you left off. On top of that, I think when you stop recording the video, it's going to close the camera connection as well, which is going to add additional lag when the camera needs to be reinitialized.
Yeah, probably you want to do a different approach there. Maybe you're putting bookmarks or noting particular tags in the file. Just, for example, a timestamp that says, all right, there's the end of one clip and the beginning of a new one, rather than like starting and stopping the video recording. As Trevor says, that start-stop problem has a lot of lag to it, and there's some overhead that you're going to incur as soon as you stop and start something. All right, so another good question for Marcus. Let's see if we've got some other folks to talk about here. Let's see. Anon says, as anonymous, I suppose.
I imagine, yeah.
Yes, Anon, our favorite contributor, says, shortcuts were retconned. I don't even know what that verb means.
Retroactively added to, I think, continuity. But basically, it's changing the past.
We're added into widgets in 4.0. Was it intentional that they aren't part of the new Jelly Bean widget design guidelines? Are we phasing them out, discouraging their use since they don't get mentioned in the new dev site either?
So, yeah, shortcuts are definitely something that we're not heavily promoting right now, and in favor of widgets. So, I'd say there is definitely a reason why they're not mentioned in our in the new design guidelines, as well as not featured as prominently in the API documentation as well either. So, yeah, we pretty much in all cases we're recommending you go with a widget where you had previously used a shortcut.
Gotcha. All right, thanks for that one. Marcus, our very popular poster today, again asks, why does a camera need to be visible on the screen to be recorded? I wasn't aware that that's actually a requirement, although I know that for the camera anyway, that's usually the behavior that we think, and that's...
Yeah, I'd say it's probably one of two things. Either it was a conscious decision by the media team to make sure that the user knows something is being recorded, or alternatively it was just an oversight in our design and it hasn't been addressed yet. Without having somebody in the room who actually wrote the camera API, I can't tell you for sure, but either one sounds plausible to me. So sorry I don't have an authoritative answer for you there.
Yeah, having talked to a few of the guys who work on the camera team, I'm guessing that was a design choice initially, since we do want folks to be able to see what they're actually recording as they're got the camera on. I have seen apps, at least one app that I've used myself for doing something like a camera surveillance, that you can turn off the thing, although I believe what's going on is that the video preview is just not being shown on screen. It's actually still playing in the background. So believe that's a design issue, but again, since we don't have the media team with us and James to ask that question, we're speculating a little bit there. All right.
All right, guys, I've actually got a question from someone on the Hangout. I'm going to put them on for you right now.
Yeah,
All
sure.
right,
Let's hear it.
Give me 1 second.
Question. Yes, please. Hello, go ahead.
He actually has no video, so it's going to be
Audio
voice.
fine.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
it's probably me, yeah?
Yeah,
Hi.
we can hear you.
Hi, everybody.
Go ahead.
Howdy.
I had a question about encoding capabilities with the new media API, and I tried it already, and the decoder stuff works great. So I put video to the codec, and it's decoded with no problems, and it's rendered in the surface. But when I try to create encoder, it tells me that some exception raised in the native code in the OpenMax, I guess, and the error code is 38, and it says that some parameters are not specified, and that's it. I just simply can't create encoder, so probably I'm doing something wrong, but there is nothing about it in documentation, and I'm just stuck. So this is the real problem here. So I can decode video, but I cannot encode it. So this is main problem.
Yeah, I'd say that the first step to debugging that would be to try and figure out what a code 38 error is. I know there are a number of numeric errors like that can happen when you work with the media APIs. And as much as I hate telling people to look at the source, it is actually the best way to figure out what's causing that. So if you take a look in the Android source code and search for that error, you can actually find out what the condition is that causes it. And that'll tell you where to go and look. My guess is it's probably something to do with your encoding settings. Possibly, maybe it's an unsupported codec on that device, something like that. Our documentation probably should be a bit better there, so I apologize for that. But that's usually what I wind up doing when I run into those.
Have you tried this on multiple devices, or is it the same error, or are you just on one specific device?
Yes, multiple devices and the same error, and I tried to create it with different codecs from my which were available in the system, and 3GP or AVC MPEG-4, so the same error and nothing else. So and I also supplied different set of parameters for codec, and it did not help either. So okay, then I will take a look into NDK with OpenMax, yeah, and probably there is some description of it.
Yeah, and if you can put post something on Stack Overflow so we can get a little bit more detail on that. Having worked with some of the media stuff myself, I know it's very finicky. I've run into some issues myself, not even using the more recent APIs. So if you can give us a little bit more detail on that, we can hopefully follow up and talk to the media team and see what's going on there. There might be just a bit you're not flipping that isn't obvious to you or us. So we can follow up with you on that one too.
And I have also one question. I was trying to create some filters for the camera, and I looked into the source code, and as you know for sure, we have several possible filters for the camera, and they depend on the manufacturer. And so different devices have different sets of the filters that we can apply to the camera. And I was browsing the source code, and actually I did not find any implementation of the filters. So I could find the constants saying the kind of sepia or black and white, etc., but I couldn't find the implementation of this filters itself in the native code anywhere. So can you?
Nope.
So I think we missed the end of your question there.
I think there's some issues with Hangout right now, and he's been cut off. So.
Uh-oh.
We got cut off. Well, if you happen to get back on, or if you just want to leave a comment on the Google Plus post as well, would work too. So that way, we can actually know what your question was there. Sadly, we missed the very end, and so we're not sure what you're actually trying to ask.
So it sounded to me like what he was finding is that the filter stuff, so the different camera filters that you can apply to the camera, so like sepia is one of them. I think there's like posterize and some other things that are kind of like standard image filters there. That there wasn't actually source code for that when he was looking at the platform. My guess is that that's as expected. That the camera operations and the different filters are actually implemented by the manufacturers. That source code, that's the custom source code developed by the folks who actually built the camera and put the device together. So probably what you're looking at is having to do, if you're, I think the goal was, I'm guessing that the goal was to make his own filters and try to do that stuff. I know that that's possible because I've seen a couple different camera apps that do something like that. Though being able to take the manufacturer's source code, I don't think they're going to be able to let you do that right now. So anyway, if you manage to get back on and ask us, because I'm not sure we got actual what your question was there, but
I think we've fixed the sound issue. Could you try speaking again from the Hangout and see if you're on air again?
not hearing you.
Yeah, I think it's fine. He said, okay, thanks.
Okay, so I think we got his question then.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the question. Appreciate it. Any more Hangout questions?
Not at the moment.
Okay, please feel free to jump on and talk to us in person. We'd be glad to talk to you about it. Let's see. Do we have any more questions from someone who is not Marcus? Let's see. We've got Frank Spasaro asks, I want to choose a photo from the gallery. No problems if a local image is chosen. However, a Picasa photo returns a URI instead of a location. Is there an approved way of handling this? Can I modify my intent to only show local images?
So I would recommend against doing that because photos coming from Picasa are still photos that belong to the user and it's something you might want to pick. And you should still have them. So the answer here is just make sure that whatever URL you get back, whether or not it's a content URL or a file URL or an HTTP URL, treat it as a URL and decode it properly, right? If it's an HTTP URL, you should go and fetch the image from the network and display it. And that's the proper way to do it. So I don't think there's a really good way to go and say you don't want those images from other sources because they are there for a reason. It is something the user can select.
Right. Yeah, so I think the answer is, yeah, you probably could do that, but we prefer that you make your app more awesome and actually handle all the images that the user has access to, because that'll give them all the choices that they want. So, good question. We'll take a little slightly different tack on that one. All right, so moving on to our next question. Julius from Auckland says, can you recommend a way to implement gapless music playback, e.g. loading two files and not experiencing a gap? So like doing a crossfade, basically. And API 7+, so API 7 and up. I'm currently thinking of using an input stream or something. Interesting question.
Yeah, I'm sure there's got to be a way to do it. What's the name of that API? Shoot, I'm suddenly drawing a blank on the API that you'd want to use for that.
I don't know it either. Input stream.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to get back to you on that one. Again, if you can post a question on Stack Overflow, we'll go ahead and try and get you some more information after the show. Unless, Rado, you happen to know the answer off the top of your head. No, I'm getting a no from off camera.
Head shake. No, that's a no. We'll hopefully get back to James on that one.
Yeah, if you've stumped Rado, you've asked a tough question.
Another question from Anon. Dave. Who's Dave? We're not Dave. Are you Dave?
Dave Burke, who was supposed to join us today, but unfortunately had a conflict. So we do have other members of the media team who are supposed to join us at some point during the show. So this is another question that we can go and revisit once we have somebody here.
There you go. All right. So Dave, who is not here, what would you say are the most exciting capabilities, use cases enabled by the new 4.1 audio APIs that weren't possible beforehand?
I think this is a question for the media team. So let's revisit this one, I think, unless you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the most important features that they added with 4.1 were the low latency APIs, so being able to play audio very quickly versus having a little bit of a delay actually in the previous versions. I think it's like probably the most important improvement that they put in there. There are some other ones as well, but it's again, I feel like I'm not the right question for me. So there's a piece of an answer there anyway. There's some other interesting stuff. If you look at the developer site and look at the release notes for 4.1, we do have a section on the media APIs and some of the changes there. So it's a way to go get some of that information. And if Dave shows up, we'll definitely come back and ask that question to him.
Or for that matter, anyone from the media team.
Or
shows up.
anyone for the media team. Yes, media team, please come and see us. Let's see. Moving on, we've got another question. I have a question from Mark in Virginia. Can you speak to using the DRM API in conjunction with the media APIs to first apply DRM to a video and then verify it and play it back? This might be too complex a topic for the Hangout. Yeah, you might be correct in that. But maybe a blog post or pointers to example code.
Yeah, so the DRM API is really designed more for DRM schemes that are included as part of the device. So if you're writing your own DRM scheme from scratch, honestly, I don't think you're going to find the built-in DRM APIs very useful for that. That's just been my experience. It's possible that there's a better way to use them that I've never heard about, but usually when you do use that, the DRM provider has to be part of the system image.
Yeah, and yeah, so I think that's all we've got to say about that one for today. Another question for Dave, who's not here, from Anonymous. Dave, what kind of hardware disqualifies a 4.1 Plus device from being able to support the new audio effects APIs? I.e., would it be possible to preemptively predict whether a device supports it or not, just from its just figure out from its hardware specs, essentially? Another good question. Support the new audio effects APIs. It sort of sounds like there's a hardware limitation based on what's been implemented by the manufacturer in terms of audio.
Right. So, somehow I doubt it's going to be just a matter of looking at the hardware specs. I imagine there's some driver issues involved as well too.
Right.
So I'm not sure that just looking at the hardware specs would give you enough information to determine whether or not audio effects are possible or not.
All right. Let's see. Moving on. Our bro in software design in Luca, Italy asks again, Android API greater than or equal to 12. Android. This is a very complex question here. Okay, Android.net.rtp, audio group, and audio stream. Are there examples of tutorial of use of this APIs? Documentation is essential for such rich APIs. Android does real time.
Yes, RTP streaming, basically.
RTP streaming. As far as I'm aware of, no, not yet. But that's some good, some feedback to take back to the team. I know they want to do some more coverage on this, but I don't think there's nothing out there right now, and that's probably why he's asking the question.
Right. There are some Stack Overflow questions asking a very similar thing to what you just asked. And there is some user-provided sample code. It's not the same as something provided officially. So again, it's very good feedback and something we'll take back to the rest of the team. But for now, I'd go and look at that if you need an example of how to use RTP.
Fair enough.
We have a question from Jeff Simmons on the G+ stream.
Sure.
He wants to know, is it possible to use media codec with audio record to do real-time compression from the mic?
So media codec with audio record to do real-time compression. That's a good question, actually. I've never tried it myself. I want to say it's probably possible at some level, given that whenever you select a codec, there's a certain amount of compression and processing that's done at that time anyway. So shorter answer is probably, but I think we need somebody from the media team here to actually go and explain a little bit more about what's involved in doing that, since I don't think anyone here has actually ever tried it.
Yes. So good question, but unfortunately we're a little out of our depth on that one. Let's see. Any other questions from the Hangout? Nate, get a head shake there. Okay. Julius from Auckland asks, is there a way to calculate the duration of the audio produced by a text-to-speech request? Currently, we have to push audio to a file to get the duration from the file. We wish to supply the user with a visual indicator of the length in advance. That's a very interesting one.
It is, and somehow my gut feeling is probably not. Because usually when you're using the text-to-speech APIs, you're doing it to play it back immediately. And for example, driving directions in Google Maps, right? You just have a voice that's reading off directions to you, and it's very much just take my text and read it, and I want to be done. So I don't think there's much in the way of the API there for things like getting the length, things like that. So I suspect what you're doing is probably the best way to do it. I can't say that authoritatively, but my gut feeling is that's probably the best way to do it right now.
All right, thanks for that question, Julius. And now we've got another one from I hear Jeff from Seattle, Washington. Is it possible to use the media codec class in conjunction with audio record? That sounds like the same question.
It does, and I suspect it is, but we need to actually get something from the team to confirm that.
Okay.
So you guys know James from the Media Framework team is currently hurriedly trying to grab a last-minute lunch, and he will hopefully be able to join us for the last 15 minutes. So he's
and these media guys and their lunches.
Well, he is outside doing
Tell
something
him
important.
that goes open. He can get a sandwich after the show.
All right, moving along here. We've got from Thomas Saker in Arvika, Sweden. All right, somebody from Sweden. Excellent. We've been, when using the MHL adapter to get HDMI out, some apps like YouTube show different views of the device display and the HDMI output. How is that done? I could not find any API for this. Is it hardware dependent?
Okay, I actually do know the answer to this one.
All right, awesome.
It came up a couple of weeks ago. So the answer is there is support in the system specifically for video services and HDMI output. So it is a manufacturer-specific setting, so not all Android devices are guaranteed to do this, even if they're running the latest version. But at least on the versions that Google's produced, whenever you have a video service on the screen, the content of that video service will be used as the HDMI output. So it's not an API that's available for developers other than to just use the system media APIs. And if you do that, whenever you have video on screen, it should be mirrored over HDMI.
All right, so it's specifically keyed to the video service.
That's correct.
Got it. But only on certain devices?
Only on certain devices. Other devices can handle it differently. They might choose to provide their own private APIs. They could go and just use mirroring all the time. It really does depend on what the manufacturer wants for their HDMI output.
All right. Great. Good question. Thank you, Thomas. And next we have Marcus from Europe. He's been very productive today with his questions. When will the camera service ever auto unlock, or how will unlock when it how will unlock it when it app crashes? The app crash still holds the lock and blocks all other apps from using the camera until the phone reboots. Yes, this is a problem. So for those of you who've done some development in camera with the camera, as I have, if you write bad code and you have errors in your code and then your camera crashes without you actually unlocking the camera app or access to the camera, yes, you will lock out not only yourself but anybody else and any other apps that actually try to use the camera because that lock has not been not barely released. Probably the first answer is make sure your app doesn't crash in the middle of using the camera. Test your code thoroughly to make sure that this doesn't happen, because that is, in fact, I think the only way you can really unlock it if that kind of an error recurs. I think even if you put in, it's probably a good idea to have in your code in one of your on pause or what's the final on destroy, to make sure that to check that you've done a release of the camera object before your app actually exits. So make sure that that code's in there. In fact, you can see an example of that code when you look at the developer guide for camera. So make sure you put that into your code. But really the only other answer is if your app is crashing and misbehaving, then yeah, you're going to cause that kind of a problem, and you're going to upset your users. So make sure you test that kind of an app thoroughly and make sure that that doesn't happen. Any other thoughts?
I think that explained it pretty thoroughly. I don't have anything else to add to that.
Okay. All right. Good question. Thank you, sir.
Hey Joe,
Next.
I've actually got Alexander back on the Hangout. He wants to chime back in about cameras and whatnot, so I want to put him on from the Hangout.
Great. Go ahead, Alexander.
Alex, go ahead, you're on.
Hi guys again. So one more question
I
about
can't hear.
camera.
Check the
Hold on a
monitor
second.
settings.
Sorry, Alex. We're getting a little.
Oh, can you hear me? Hi.
I'm getting it from Alex. Hold on one
Hello.
second.
Ah, there you go. We can hear you now.
There we go.
Go ahead.
Oh, good. So, as you know, if we want to process the video as a picture from the camera in Leaf, we have really small FPS coming back from camera, and this is really frustrating because if we want to make some processing, some filters, etc., we would really like to have a kind of real-time stream. And do you guys plan to provide us with such, I don't know, possibilities, SDK to process the stuff in native code just to gain more FPS and etc. So.
Yeah, so that's a good question. There's actually 3 different ways that I know of that you can get the different images coming through the camera device, whatever that camera hardware is. And the first one is pretty obvious, but there's 2 additional ones that at least I know of that you can use to get the different frames from the camera. In escalating levels of complexity, actually. If you would actually, I'd have to go back and look at my notes to kind of explain some of this, unless James, who's come and joined us recently, can talk about this stuff. James, you want to talk about different ways that you could get the different frames from the camera? I know there's a couple of different approaches that you can take.
This is James. I think in order to get the frames from camera, there are a couple of ways. One is you can use the preview callback. Basically, the Java API, we published the mandate that 2 colors format must be supported. One is YV12, the other one is MV21. So if you use a preview frame callback, you can have access to the frame data that way. I think that's currently, if you use a Java API, that's probably the only way. And natively, basically, we have the recording frame callback. Also, you can gain access to the camera HAL recording frames also. Does this answer your question?
Can I get to this callback? So I'm not sure that it's documented. So is there a way I can find it and put a listener on it?
Yeah, the steps involved. Basically, you just need to register a callback. The callback is a preview frame callback on the camera.java class. And then the application should receive callbacks from the camera once the preview is on.
But it's the FPS is really low there. So it's
Frames per second is low.
maximum 10, 15 FPS frames per second I can get from there. And if I need to amend the data from it, it becomes even slower. So I'm really eager to find the way to make it faster. So I understand that we can use native stuff, and for example, if we look to the OpenCV project, they work with camera, and it's written purely in C, as I understand. So I really hope you guys someday decide to open such capabilities for us developers, so we could use at least 30 FPS for the camera.
Yes, I think you are right. When you use this preview callback, the frame rate is low. The reason like the frame rate is low is because the frame data has to be copied out. So there's a memcopy involved. We are working on some like enhancement to the whole camera framework. I cannot say for sure like when new API will be available, but definitely we are working on something to improve in this regard for future API release, but not anytime soon.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Great. And if you could post a question on this for on Stack Overflow, and I'll see if I can get you a little bit more information. I believe there's some other other approaches that you can take with this, but I can't talk about them off the top of my head. So just post a question on Stack Overflow and post it in the Hangout, and I'll go follow up with you there.
Now that we've actually got James in the room, do you think you may be able to introduce yourself and tell the viewers a little bit about who you are and what you do in the Android team?
Okay. My name's James Stone. I'm the tech lead for Android media team. Basically, like our team is dealing with all the media framework and camera framework. And we also have a separate team for like audio framework. So pretty much like a multimedia stuff, everything. Thanks.
Great.
Very nice.
Thanks for
so
joining
there's
us, James.
a couple of questions that we had queued up from earlier on for James. So while you guys look those up, I've got one from Tom on the live stream. He'd like to apply arbitrary effects to the system media stream, so things like creating the equalizer, etc. He can do this if he writes his own media player, but he'd really like to be able to just create the effects and let users use whatever media player they would usually use to apply those effects. Is that possible?
The effects you want to apply depends on how you get the frame in the first place. If you want to apply effects to the decoder output, that's possible. We just published a new media API called the Media Codec.java class, which allows you to gain access to the decoder output directly, and then you can do image processing on the decoder output. I think that's well, it really depends on the context, like how you want to apply the effects. So that's one way.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Don't put down that microphone just yet. We've still got a few more questions for you. Scaling back to earlier question here. How do I determine if there's a specific audio encoding, so AMR-WB, rather than some of the other flavors of it?
Yeah, AMR-NB.
AMR-NB and some of the other ones. So audio codec get codec has no constant for AMR-WB and others. For example, the Xperia X10 doesn't support it, and I want to be able to detect that. So, and if I try to do it, it actually crashes in native C. So, this question is how to detect if those formats are supported.
That's a great question, and it comes really like in a timely fashion. In Jelly Bean, we released this a set of new API, Java APIs. One of the API allows you to find out all the codecs available on a specific device, Android device. The class name is Media Codec List and Media Codec List Info. So using these two classes, you can basically walk through all the media codecs available on a device, and you can find out the capabilities of each codec, such as whether this is a AMR narrowband or AMR wideband, whether this is like a AAC or any other video codecs. For video codecs, you can find out whether like what kind of profiles and levels support for that specific video codec. So it is a new set of API we just published, and it is very useful, I think, to you guys.
Great. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Let's see. Scrolling back to some previous questions we had. Is it possible to use the media codec class in conjunction with audio record?
Right. And we had a second question, which is very similar. Is it possible to do compression when you're using media record?
I think media codec is designed in a way that is generic. So it's basically the same set of API methods can be applicable to both encoder and decoder. So you should be able to use for encoding purpose also.
Okay, great. Let's see. Marcus from Europe asked us, will there be support for any streaming-capable container format in Media Recorder, like MPEG-TS, in the future? Actually, we can't answer that question because that's a future-looking question.
Right, yeah, that one we probably have to skip. I mean, unless there's something you can share, but generally speaking, questions like this we have to skip, so.
Gotcha. All right, moving on. There's another one we wanted to hit.
That one might be a good one to revisit, the camera.
Right, camera question. Why does the camera need a visible surface on the screen to be recorded? Is that actually true, actually, is the next question.
Yeah, this is. I think this is true. Currently, for the Java camera.java class we have, this is due to a legacy reason because, in the past, some of the vendor has to run the preview before they can supply the video frames or preview frames. So that's why we have to have that available.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a legacy problem there.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're actually back to new questions.
All right, and we're back to our regular questions. Excellent.
I've actually got a question from Hangout. It's going to be live and we have video this time. So
Oh, yay! We actually have someone with video.
Yay! Actual live person. Fantastic.
Yeah, I have a question on the SDK manager. I know there's a recent update 20.0.3, and I saw a new option there that says enable preview tools. So I tried checking that, and I'm not seeing the preview for tools 21. Do you know if that's a new button that they haven't put on, they haven't fixed yet, or 21's not available for preview of the SDK manager? Do I need to file a
don't
bug?
believe 21 is available yet. So
It was released on
it's
the
news
9th.
to me that they have the preview button there. So
Okay.
yeah, I suspect probably sometime soon, but
Because the 21 preview was announced on the 9th.
it should be
And
up
it's
there.
out on the download page very obscurely. It's not listed on the main downloads, but you go to the bottom, it's a sub-page. ADT 21 preview requires the R21 preview.
Yeah, and just to check, did you try refreshing the SDK manager? Because I know it does do some caching.
I did. I turned off cache a while ago because I had problems with caching, and I think the newest update, the 20.3, is supposed to fix the caching problem. But I've,
Yes, that's true. I've worked on that.
yeah,
As that's
I did a clear download cache, and I've turned it off and on, and
right.
I
Just
would
a
have to
quick.
check I'd have to check the version numbers, but is it possible that the reason you can't see the preview is because the final version got released a couple of days ago?
So I think I can answer this.
well, this is
question.
the preview of R21 wasn't
Right.
released yet. This
Yeah,
is I
the-
currently have 20.0.3
Right.
of the SDK manager tool.
In general, so the tools guys, I work with them actually quite a bit. And,
Okay.
The preview stuff doesn't actually get released through the SDK manager. You have to go to the
Okay.
tools.android.com.
Right, that's where I got it
site
from.
to
But
actually get
I just saw that new preview button that said, to allow you to get tools through that, or the previews.
Yeah, I believe they're working on a new feature to actually let you get the preview through the SDK manager, but I don't think
Okay.
that's quite working yet.
Okay,
and I
that's
know they've been
probably-
busy working on the 2003 release because of that caching problem that you noticed. And that's
Right,
something
and
that they've
2023 is
been-
out, so
They've
okay.
been very busy with that, and so I'm not
Yeah.
surprised that there's no 21 preview out at the moment. So just stay tuned. I know those guys are working on quite a few things. So yeah, stay tuned on the tools site.
Yeah.
That's where
The
they'll
tool site
announce it, and then you
still
may be able to
lists-
see it in the SDK manager after
Yeah,
that.
the tools site still lists R19 as the latest release
Well, okay,
The
so they're way
website's-
behind on their
website's really out of date
documentation, guys. So
on
you know,
that, so I'll pass that along. Update them.
they're trying to do too many things at once there.
Probably. Okay, thanks.
Sure. Thanks for the question. All right. Let's see. We've got
Nick.
a few more
Yeah.
minutes to do questions. And
Yeah.
Nick from Chicago asks, is it possible to play audio backward? Wow, that's a very interesting question.
Listening for hidden messages and songs.
James, you want to tackle that one? Do we have an idea of that one, or are we going to have to punt on this?
So I can answer it partially. So you can play audio backwards if you're using the audio record and audio play mechanisms. I
Okay.
don't think you can do it using the media recorder, but if you're using the raw WAV files, then you can just flip the bits and play everything in reverse order.
All right. Fredo says it is possible, so I believe him. But only with which particular
Yeah,
class?
with the audio record and audio playback, so that's for raw WAV audio, effectively. So you
Okay.
can't just play an arbitrary song. It needs to effectively be something you have recorded with no encoding.
Got it. Oh, so unencoded audio probably, but encoded audio, you're going to be out of luck. You have to decode it first, probably. All right, great. Nice question there. Very interesting. Our redneck Republican from Texas is joining us and says, I see low-level media API as a good opportunity to save power on host devices. Do we have any tips to make good use of the API to do so? Also, is there a way to offload some pertaining work to the GPU when using the low media API? Good question. I see James shaking his head. You got an answer to that one?
So for this low-level media API, I think one of the interesting point is like how to find out what's the battery consumption when you use this low-level media API versus the high-level API we used to have. If you want to do like some filtering applied to this decode output, definitely you can leverage the GPU to do some image processing so that you can save some power. In addition to that, you can, for example, if you are writing a streaming application, you can do smart things like do better buffering in terms of using the default buffering mechanism from the media framework, so that you can, for example, turn off the radio for better radio usage, and so that you can save some time. Because for streaming applications, if you try to get as much as data as much as possible at once, and then shut down the radio, and then after sometimes you turn on radio and then do it again, this can save power. So this is like an advantage using low-level media APIs. On the other hand, this low-level media API, because it introduced some like traffic between the JNI layer and the Java layer, so you have some additional overhead compared to the previous high-level API. So it's kind of a trade-off. If you write a application like in a better or smarter way, then probably you can gain in terms of battery consumption. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. Any more Hangout questions?
Not actually. We do have one from Jonathan. I'm gonna put him on in a second, but why don't you go ahead and answer one from the moderator page, and I'll put Jonathan on next.
Sounds great. Okay, so we've got Robin from Georgia who asks, I have a live audio feed that I'd like to stream to Android apps, desktop web browsers, and iOS apps. It's a multi-platform audio feed. Do you have a suggestion for a common codec that could be used, if any? I'm not familiar enough with audio formats to answer that one. Anybody else got a...
Well, for audio streaming, you can commonly on Android devices, like there are multiple audio codecs are supported, like AAC, and AMR narrowband, wideband. Those can be used for streaming applications.
Yeah, I think the constraining factor is not going to be the desktop. Pretty much any audio format you find, you'll be able to play somehow on a desktop. The tricky part is mobile devices because they have limited capabilities and they rely on hardware decoding, which means a lot of times you need to have hardware support. So I don't think anybody in this room can really speak as to what codecs iOS supports. But on Android, I think, like you said, AMR and AAC both have pretty wide support, if I remember correctly. So both of those are a safe bet. And then from there, find one that works on iOS, and the desktop won't be a problem.
Great, good answer there.
All right.
All right,
If you guys are ready for
line.
Hangout, then I'm gonna go ahead and put Jonathan on.
All right, and this will probably be our last question, I suspect.
Great. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Hello, I need to build an application that reacts to the user input by changing the music. And for that I have several music files that I need to somehow either switch seamlessly from one to another in a registered manner. So generally I need to trick the user into into not noticing that I've changed from one music track to another, since they differ in very small details. And I was wondering what was the best way, if at all, that I could implement that.
And I think this is sort of related to the question earlier about how to crossfade music as well. I don't know, was that your question or was that somebody else?
That was not my question, but this was a good group of questions to listen in on.
Right.
Gotcha.
So James, do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, I can provide you a hint. You can try it out and see whether it works for you. Basically, we also in Jelly Bean we published the API allows you to do gapless playback for like audio. You can try it out. The API should be available in media player.java class. Try it out. Let us know your feedback. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you very much.
That's more for gapless though, right? So playing one song and immediately cutting to the other, right?
Yeah.
So is there any way to do a crossfade, or is that not possible?
Crossfade, as far as I know, currently no, not possible.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the question. And with that, I think we're out of time. And you want to get a little bit of a preview for what we've got on tap next week?
Indeed. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we are on the air every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific time. So take a look at, actually I guess our Google Plus page is the best place to find us, developer.android.com/plus. I believe it's just plural. There's only one.
Right.
Anyway, yeah, developer.android.com/plus. You can find links to each broadcast as well as the moderator page. Next week we will have folks from the Android security team on hand, including Kenny Root, who will be able to answer all of your questions about Android security. So be sure to join us next week.
Great.
All right, and with that, I think that's it.
All right. Thanks for joining us.
All right,
We'll see you
y'all
next
next week. Oh, actually, one last thing.
Uh-oh.
Thank you to Daniel Pham, our engineer, as well as Rado Meyer, who's the producer for this show. And once again, my name is Trevor Johns.
I'm Joe Fernandez.
Yes, and a very special thank you to our guest. So, yes, thank you, James. All right. I think that's it. See y'all next week.
Bye-bye.
Take it easy. Thank you.